You're listening to the Flex Success podcast, where we teach you how to be less shit.
I'm your co-host Lizzie, and this is Dean. We'll be covering all topics relating to health, fitness, and bodybuilding.
Join us as we use our in the trenches experience and up-to-date science to provide you with information that you can actually use.
If you like what we do, be sure to give us a like, follow, share, and tag us on social media.
We are back with yet again another Flex Success podcast. I'm joined by Flex coach George, mate. How the fuck are you?
Tip top, mate. Can't complain. The UK spring is starting to pick up. We've gone from like 0 degrees to 1, so it's a good step in the right direction. Yeah, it's absolutely terrible, man. But no, everything's all good this end, mate. Getting ready for season A. Starting to cook up and get a bit more exciting now as the single-digit numbers start creeping in.
Yeah, man. As always, it comes up quick. I think, oof, that's only 2 months away. And then, like a personal update for us, Liz and I have just decided we had said that we would not go back to Turkey. But when we said that, we meant Istanbul mainly, just because it's so chaotic there. And we've just booked ourselves 4 weeks down in the sort of southern region of Turkey from April, which we're going to stay in Bodrum, I think, at this stage. We've got such a cool place there, man. Little two better, inside a resort, free bike hire. Amazing.
Yeah. Turkey's experience was a bit odd. The south, we went to the south and we was in Marmaris, and it was so touristy and like, you know, group hotel package kind of holiday vibes. It wasn't like an exploring culture. There was a few good spots, like we traveled around on the boats and stuff and saw some really nice places, but it wasn't like collectively there. So it was a bit of a meh experience. Yeah,
we're definitely going to be getting a car, I think, like maybe on a weekend or something. Or actually, you know what? It might actually have to be midweek trips, because the weekends from April, as you've just said, are going to be season A. So it's shaping up to be a really good season, man. Actually, I've got a couple of guys that are going to be going head to head that are going to have to duke it out, which is going to be super interesting.
I've got us in the same position, man. I'm waiting to see where because their heights stack up really close to classic. I'm like, yeah, okay, no, we're probably going to see you guys meet at some point across this season.
What heighted classic boys do you have? What weight category are we looking at?
Which one's the smallest? Eugene or Kai? It should work across 3 of the categories: Eugene, Kai, Blake, or Blake, Eugene, Kai. I'd have to double check the heights for them too.
Yeah. Blake's probably what, like 5'10" or 11 or something, isn't he? He's a bit taller, isn't he? Blake?
Classic Blake with the long hair.
Yeah.
He's like 6'4".
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, he's super tall, yeah. No,
he's a walking giant. When you see him, you're like...
You know, I saw him in person. I was like, man, he was tall. Yeah, my bad.
He's a giant.
Any of your boys going to be sitting around that sort of, 178 to 175 centimeter range, like 91 kilos, 93 kilos?
Kai.
Yeah, so it'll be the same.
Yeah,
man, it's gonna be some fun times. We'll have although we just found out that Kyle, not Kai, or Kill as some people refer to Kyle as, he got heighted years ago at 174, and I said, dude, we got a picture in Melbourne together. Let's quickly check your height again. And he's like, I'm like, you're taller than me, and I'm 175. So anyway, he's 176. He only needs to be 175.2, I think, to get the 91 kilo nod. So he should hopefully be under 91.6 or whatever it is.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, but all of my collective competitors are all very much boxed up. I've got like Gold Coast show and Sydney show, but none of the other ones. So except for I've encouraged a couple of them to do the Melbourne show just so get a bit more fun from the season.
Yeah. So I'll have Adelaide, I'll have Queensland, Melbourne, and Sydney. Yeah, no, I'll have a few in each, and then they'll all come together collectively. So, and then a few of the boys are actually looking to do a couple of the European shows or Asian shows afterwards, which should be super fun.
Same as me. We had that conversation of maybe a career trip. That's Jerome Simpson height comparison for Blake. You know Jerome?
Yeah.
Blake is just underneath him in height.
Okay. Cool. It's going to be a fun season, man. It's coming up fast. So, any other personal updates, mate?
Nothing that's exciting for the listeners, just the same mundane stuff. I don't really have an exciting life, Dean. It's just coaching and training.
That's what I said to one of the boys of a podcast last night. I'm like, it's a weird world. I look at men in their underwear on my computer, and I thoroughly enjoy it, as homoerotic as that may sound. And whatever, who's here to judge me? No one.
Yeah, no, exactly that, man.
So, but anyway, mate, I last pod we did a training variables that matter, and then we thought we'd keep in tune with that a little bit and do a Cardi-no or Cardi-yay or Cardi-yay or Cardi-nay would be a more appropriate rhyme. But before, and I've got 5 new questions, mate, for the fast round at the end, and I've actually requested them from Liz. So you've got that to look forward to, because I just finished up at Spanish class. Tell you what, mate, there's very few things in this world that have made me really feel like a dumbass, and learning Spanish is one of them. But that aside, what do you do?
Learning language in any case, like, people think like it takes you years of cognitive development to learn English from nothing or whatever your home, national language is. And then we start learning a foreign language and we think that we're going to be able to pick it up in like a year when it took you like 10 to 15 maybe to get like full verbal fluidity in this one language, let alone learning a whole new one that has different rules and parameters to the one you've ingrained a lot of memory and cognition to.
Yeah, you got to say some things in reverse. And now it's just making me speak bad English and also bad Spanish.
True bilingual, that is.
And then these assholes that speak multiple language, I just think, I'm becoming more impressed with them,
Yeah, those are looking at 7 different languages, including the ones like, difference between Mandarin, traditional Chinese, Japanese, and also European languages as well. Like, what?
Even to that, we talk about muscle memory in training and growth. The way in which your mouth is designed is a byproduct of your years of like language. So for me to like roll my R's and get trills is difficult. And, this is why there's different people from around the world that just can't say certain letters because they just don't have the musculature set up to do so. You have to retrain all that shit. It's fucking wild. But mate, cardio, Cardi-nay, Cardi-yay, or is it maybe Cardi depends? It probably is that one. I thought we'd just sort of break down. I've had some thoughts about like what we could talk about here and probably talk about like the 3 primary reasons why a bodybuilder specifically might consider the introduction of cardio, and then we can maybe pass out like what those benefits would be within each one. So absolutely. Those three reasons, primary reasons. Not to say there isn't more, but at least for a podcast here, one being to improve cardiorespiratory function. So specifically, we're talking about like lung health, the ability to carry oxygen, the ability to perform. And then secondary to that, if you improve cardiorespiratory function, you also will improve metabolic function. What I mean by that more specifically is like how well or how poorly, maybe, you use different energy substrates, whether it be carbohydrates or fats to perform exercise. So there's one primary reason why you might do cardio. A second one might be to actually just improve cardiovascular health. How well do your arteries and your heart actually work? Are we be able to correct maybe some dysfunction? And then the other one that a lot of people probably do, and they don't think about the other two. It's probably the most common implementer, which is just for the purpose of burning calories, which is the boring one, but is used frequently.
Absolutely. I think even when we break down into some of these benefits from cardiovascular improvement, I think we also see that quite large degrees of these do kind of interlink and overlap with layered benefit in all systems, which is always the interesting topic of conversation, man. There's a lot of misconception around cardiovascular health and enhanced people where there's like this prerequisite that we have to do direct cardio. It doesn't, no conversation around current NEAT expenditure parameters, output, assessment of metrics. It's just kind of this start using gear, got to use cardio every single day to monitor and manipulate these risks. And I do agree with some of the logic as to where the thought comes from. We're increasing these capacities of stress on these internal systems, and thus typically we usually require a bit more support to keep them at homeostatic points that are healthy. But it's not this prerequisite that it's a absolute you have to do. And hopefully today with these considerations you'll see why.
Yeah. What would be the percentage you think currently of your clientele that are doing formal cardio?
Oh, dude, fuck me, sub 25%.
Okay, cool. All right.
Easily sub 25%, I reckon.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because it's true. Like, I mean, I think the problem that people that you've just mentioned there is that people look at cardio potentially, well, at least certain camps do, as something that you just do because you should. But it's not to say that it is necessary. I think like if you ask yourself this question of like, should I do cardio? What you should be asking yourself is like, out of those 3 particular reasons that we just listed there, is there a requirement for you specifically to change or try and drive an adaptation for one of those? If there is, then you should probably do cardio. But if otherwise you're like performing quite well, arguably maybe you don't need it. Certainly don't need, or you may not necessarily benefit from it, depending on all of the things to consider. So,
and it can in some cases be a hindrance.
Yeah, and we'll get into that I think when we talk about more specifically like this baseline cardiorespiratory function, whereby if you want to derive a very specific outcome like enhancing sports performance, and when I say sports performance, I mean more like anaerobic, high octane fuel, power, this sort of stuff. And that might actually be problematic for some bodybuilders. So
yeah,
let's jump into it. Cardiorespiratory benefits. I think we can break this down into 3 subcategories. Category number 1, aerobic function, and we can talk about what that is. category number 2, anaerobic, and then category number 3, metabolic function. When we refer to aerobic, it is like energy burned in the presence of oxygen is technically what we're talking about. What most people may think of it being as referred to as like steady state, consistent intensity exercise that can be done in a manner that you can probably withstand a somewhat of a decent conversation. Like you will be out of breath, but not incapacitated. And the benefit of this particular type of cardio is that, and it's usually longer in duration, lower in intensity in this instance being effort. The intention here is to just improve general health function, to improve general recovery capacity, to improve like maybe your tolerance to endurance or exercise or things like that. And maybe we can pass out some of those a little bit more.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, the aerobic adaptations are quite likely, like you said, for general health improvements. So we're thinking long-term improvements to mortality, increasing vectors of longevity that come from decreased stress response on the heart, essentially, right? We're thinking about improving overall function in stroke volume that might equate to better efficiency of the heart pumping blood around per pump or per stroke. That might then lead on to, again, longer term, better efficiency in heart function. That could also be seen through the then increase of, say, oxygen filling capacity that can then trade off again in long term, these 1%ers that all lead to reduced mortality risk in just less stress, longer term, more efficiency. And that byproduct just passes downstream into training vectors, like you said, improved recovery capacity due to whether it be efficiency in mitochondrial action, or as I just mentioned, some of those VO2 max capacities, increased oxygen transfer rate, whether it be at the source from the heart's functionality in response to the lungs, or at the cellular site specifically due to density changes.
Yep. And you can think of this as total body general adaptations just to support human function. This is the reason why you want an aerobic base, and an aerobic base is necessary in order to then have an anaerobic base, which if we move into anaerobic capacity or anaerobic adaptation, we're talking about exercise or energy demand in the absence of oxygen, which is typically then going to mean that you are burning through fuel. So in the first sort of like, let's just talk about this very quickly. In aerobic or aerobic metabolic function, we're talking about usually relying heavily on fat to then eventually create ATP, being the energy source that the body uses. In anaerobic, we're going to be using either carbohydrates to be converted, or in the really, really highly anaerobic, you'll hear this anaerobic glycolytic cycle potentially. Glycolysis is the breakdown of carbohydrates. That's where that name comes from. And anaerobic being the metabolism of non-fatty acid-based energy. You might use something like creatine phosphate, which people are probably very familiar with by supplementing creatine. You supplement creatine, you build up intramuscular creatine phosphate levels. That creatine phosphate gives you the opportunity to donate phosphate to the electron transport chain. That then gives you fuel, so you can do super powerful shit, basically. If only they taught me it like that at the university, that would have been so much easier. But I can explain that. Meanwhile, fucking Krebs cycle just makes your head want to explode. So the benefits of this is more sports performance, and it's far more specific. This is the one that probably most bodybuilders don't really need to take a tremendous amount of interest in. You will be anaerobically performing in weight training, primarily using creatine phosphate. If you think about this, let me quickly do this for people so they can maybe think about how this works in an exercise session. These numbers aren't solid, but they're like a good indicator. Creatine phosphate can donate energy with maximum capacity efforts for about 10 to 30 seconds. Usually it's done in about 10. Sure. It takes somewhere between 2.5 and 5 minutes of just passive rest for it to recover. Immediately there should be alarm bells going off. Oh, if I do a set of 10 reps on bench press to maximum intensity, I fail. It takes me around about 20 seconds. Cool. And then if I go and do it again within 2 minutes, I can't perform as well. That's because those energy stores have not restored themselves properly. So we're highly reliant upon creatine phosphate in weight training. We're not so much reliant on carbohydrates, although they do obviously get burned because we're doing repeat efforts of creatine phosphate plus a little bit of spillover into glycolytic, to the point where as you go through your training session, you will be depleting some carbohydrates. It's just not as much as what you would expect. And it's nowhere near as close as, say, what you would burn through doing repeat bouts of 800-meter runs. Because that energy system, before lactate accumulates to the point where it decreases performance, is around about 2 minutes of like what we classify as submaximal effort. I refer to the 800 meters because it's the perfect example of that system. If you look at the Olympic runners, they're doing like minute 30s for the world records, and they're going like not at max like a sprinter. They're not sprinting like Usain Bolt was, because if they did that, they'd last 10 seconds. Yep. They're also not going quite as fast as what a 400-meter runner would go, because they'd also burn out and they'd cark it by the end. So they're finding this, like what they call an anaerobic threshold, the threshold whereby, you know, metabolism of hydrogen and stuff builds up to the point where it decreases performance, and going just below it. And you can think of this like weight training. People must be thinking now, yeah, look, I don't probably need this, because you're getting adequate rest periods. So I passed. That was much longer than I intended. However, the point being, the point being here is this: you don't need to drive anaerobic threshold performance enhancement as a weight training individual unless for some reason there is a major sticking point to your ability to progress over time. That's probably, you know, and maybe you would get better intraset recovery if to be honest, but that would be one thing. If you're a really high volume trainer and you're not recovering appropriately during sets, then perhaps maybe doing some anaerobic stuff might be beneficial for you. Or maybe when we get down to the like the reason for why you might do some anaerobic stuff, there is some potential advantages to maybe improving cardiac function if you want to like really challenge the heart. However, it might also be counterproductive to some of our cohort too. So.
No, absolutely, man. I think that intraset recovery is probably one of the main kind of points of anaerobic adaptation. I actually carried some weight, and one of the bigger parts of that will be seen in lactic acid, like threshold capacity. So, like thinking about the clearance of lactate from the system, or just in general, the improvement of that anaerobic capacity for some people would offer benefit because it helps to clear out those waste products, CO2, lactate from the system much more efficiently. Thus means that the circulating level of lactate in the blood remains under the threshold that leads to a negative inverse change on the response. So that in and of itself could mean that, you know, instead of dropping off performance toward that back end of the session, fatigue starting to creep in, losing strength endurance as the session progresses, it might carry weight there quite incredibly, to be honest, to actually get you through your session effectively.
Yeah, and actually one other adaptation that is highly advantageous is that athletes that are typically more anaerobically gifted with a good cardiac or aerobic base will generally become more energy efficient in both directions, which is the really cool thing. Like both directions, what I mean by that is this: you will burn through less carbohydrates per unit of work if you are more anaerobically fit than what you would be if you weren't. You can think of like as a low anaerobic threshold or a low anaerobic fitness as being like a really inefficient machine. You dump fuel in it and it just burns through it despite it's not doing too much. This sounds like maybe a good idea if you're trying to burn fat, but it doesn't work like that. You actually typically more burn through sugars. So you end up just depleting glycogen and becoming more fatigued. But then on the reverse to that, you then coming out the back of it are typically a far better fat immobilizer and then burner in the absence of like high intensity exercise. So you can use fat for fuel a little bit more, you know, readily and a little bit more easily and a little bit more efficiently in periods of rest. So there's an advantage to maybe having like some anaerobic performance up your sleeve to a degree. And now here's the big asterisk. On paper, this sounds fucking mad. Everybody should be like doing some form of anaerobic training. If we want to burn more fat at rest, we want to use less carbohydrates during training, we want to recover faster, we want to be this, you know, like absolute athlete. However, it comes at a massive recovery, consideration. It comes at a high energy demand consideration, and it also comes with the consideration of, like we briefly touched on there, is whether or not your heart is in a position to handle the intensity that is involved with this kind of exercise.
Absolutely. And, you know, specific to, I guess, maybe more your cohort of clientele, Dean, once you're starting to deal with these individuals that are crossing an inflection of serious mass, you know, 120 kilo blokes, 130 kilos of muscle with low body fat, these individuals are not going to have that, well, even less ability to be able to recruit that sort of nervous system stress. And thus the recovery capacity is already somewhat blunted in these individuals because their ability to recruit stress in the process of the stimulus they're adding into their physique and their muscles in the process of training. And thus it actually ends up being quite a bit of a hindrance into them most likely having a negative trade-off into their ability to actually perform in its entirety just due to that capacity.
Yeah, the oxygen demand for a hypermuscular individual is sometimes too great for them to see any benefit in the work that they should technically be doing to make them fitter, to use that word. It's just not worth it. And in saying that though too, if you ever wanted to like challenge it just a little bit, like if you think about oxygen demand, like where do I need to give oxygen in order to keep this person moving? This is why I would, for example, recommend if somebody did want to do this work for whatever reason, that they do something that's a little bit, one, it's not loaded. So, and typically that requires their entire body because the demand will happen faster. Whereas what you may find is if you're someone who's hypermuscular and you do something quite isolated, like a bike, although it's easier, what will end up happening is that you'll challenge the quads like locally, and they'll be really inefficient at energy metabolism there locally, and you'll fatigue there before you'll fatigue your entire system anyway. So, you know, cardio it's an interesting one because like you can argue for and against all of this. The last part of this, like just general cardiorespiratory fitness that I was talking about, was is kind of like just been mentioned throughout, which is the beauty of being more cardiorespiratorily fit, like how well your oxygens utilize oxygen, and did I say how well your oxygen, how well your lungs? I think I did say that. How well your lungs utilize oxygen, and how well each tissue that's under demand clears lactate, clears CO2, etc. But the benefits here is improved substrate efficiency. You can burn through less carbohydrates per unit of work. You can burn through more fat per unit of rest. And that is a massive advantage to having at least a baseline cardiorespiratory fitness there.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the cardiovascular health element of this, I mean, we've mentioned a few and touched on a few points here, but just for me, one of the biggest reasons I'm typically talking about cardio with any of my clients is due to the health impact. It's usually due to management of some system that is upregulated, whether it be nervous system related, total systemic cost related, due to the consequences of what we do as enhanced bodybuilders. So when we think about the benefits to cardiovascular health, it spans quite fast. We spoke about stroke volume, so just thinking about how much blood flow per beat of the heart is improving. So obviously that is an easy one to understand. A more efficient heart, better efficiency and flow. That obviously can have downstream benefits. Obviously, cardio on top of this, drives in its own lower blood pressure, makes blood vessels and arteries far more responsive and malleable. Helps to improve viscosity of the blood, so thinner blood, less effort and intense, so less effort and stress on the heart to actually pump and move that less thick fluid-like substance around these small capillaries, arteries, and vessels. There's also more niche effects that are seen within vasodilative properties that happen at the endothelial cells. So we increase nitric oxide production from those cells that can obviously relax and expand blood vessels, which of course carries back up to blood pressure improvements. There's a trade-off positively between cardiovascular and like the nervous systems. When we look at the sympathetic state and that fight or flight state that's typically being almost controlled by the adrenals, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Cardio in the right amount seems to improve that transition away from fight or flight state into fed and rested. It seems to help with that parasympathetic trade-off and balancing of that sympathetic central nervous system, into like autonomic nervous system, and helps that transition back through there. And all of that translates back up to improved longevity, improved heart health. We look at studies and data on it. We can see there's a clear, even like expenditure. I know like we've spoken on direct cardio, but even NEAT expenditure added into the total cardio conversation massively decreases mortality risk due to cardiac related events later on. People that tend to move more see less of these problems in the statistics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these systems are reactionary to the demands that it's required. So, and those numbers are pretty easy to pass that out very quickly too, like steps and stuff. The association with like generally moving more and decreasing all-cause mortality is only in the vicinity of like 7,500 to 8,000 steps per day. It's pretty easy. And mentioning that too is also it's one of these, like, with all of our arguments, we always have to talk about bodybuilding. There's like this big asterisk of like, yeah, but what's the it depends part, and how much baseline aerobic training you do, and then therefore whether or not anaerobic training is necessary, is all dependent upon how well does your heart function in its current situation, how much activity in NEAT do you do, and is that formalized, like, it's not NEAT, but is it formalized movement because you have a very sedentary job? Or is this just the way in which you live your life and you're actually not really moving that much, for any given amount of time that is worth it? For example, if I was to do no formal walking, despite the fact that I might do 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day on average, I would probably only do 2, But so like I'm actively deliberately doing steps to keep myself functionally healthy, so I don't have to do extra cardio. And it actually doesn't cost me that much time. But if I did none of that, then I'd have to do more formal cardio. And this is typically the reason why I would have some clients doing it and some clients not doing it. But yeah, your general implementation times here are for just general cardiorespiratory health, for, perhaps maybe building some metabolic function improvement pre-prep. That might be one argument for it. Or it would be reactive to either fitness requirements or when you were just talking about now the cardiovascular stuff more specifically, actual dysfunction, which is potentially problematic.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Some factors. So let me pose a hypothetical to you then, George, if I may.
I do love these.
A reasonably large bodybuilder, a reasonably active job, doing 8,000 to 10,000 steps per day. So you could argue that they're doing enough. The food's in control. Everything's like looking pretty good. They're doing all of the sort of like prophylactic supplementation that they need, but things are a little skew on things like resting heart rate. Is there a limit to like what you would see or you would like to see with someone's resting heart rate before you would maybe consider some form of intervention with cardio?
I typically like to sit under the 80. I typically like to sit under the 80, and I put more of a focus to not let it go past the 80 in my individuals that are enhanced. There's even further demand to make sure we keep that lower. So yeah, 80 is probably about my round off number I keep underneath.
Mm. And
That is
what would
also
be your
relevant.
concern when a heart rate is going that fast?
For me, I'd start troubleshooting through chronic arousal of the nervous system first, looking at total recovery capacity and thinking, right, okay, is there any way we can regulate the internal systems to get them in that well-rested state better? Like, is it a chronic exposure to stress that's leading to this, and then better fatigue management to get it back in alignment? It's not usually straight away jump straight to cardio.
Yeah, because I mean, if I can play devil's advocate, someone's doing 10,000 steps per day, they're training 5 days per week, they have a 40 to 50 hour job, they sleep 8 hours, they've got kids, they've got family, they've got financial stress. And then you're like, mate, your heart rate shit. You now need to go and do 3 hours cardio this week.
Oh, no.
Is that going to drive more stress or less stress?
Absolutely more, man. Absolutely more. I think that we've got some data considerations dependent on specific types of cardio that you're doing. So, like if we was doing more like low intensity, more like zone 2 regimes, it's like 150 minutes per week approximately. And obviously, as you go up in intensity, thus the duration of exposure decreases. So, like zone 4, zone 5, we're looking at around like 90 to 100 minutes per week to see improvements. Now, I challenge this to say just because data says that's what we need to do, if you take this individual who's at a baseline of their expenditure and you just crank them up to here, there might be too further distance between point A to point B that's going to recruit stress. So most of the time, as much as anything with bodybuilding physique development, minimum effective, although data says that's minimum effective, let's integrate this a little bit slowly and just see what response we can get the most out of the least, again, from time to parameters and restraints, as well as then stress on the system. And this is what I see with most of my clients. I don't tend to see us needing to crank up to sort of that 100 sort of minutes of cardio per week. Usually sort of 15 to 20 minute sessions, 45 minutes to 60 minutes usually does enough to get things moving in the right direction, and then escalate from there with response.
Yeah, man, I would almost identically repeat my experience as a coach, and that is that I've seen benefit as low as doing 3 by 15 minutes a week. Literally. You know, or even 2 by 20s occasionally, depending on the person. And the 2 by 20 is usually for the individual that, you know, here's one thing I've known: the person who does less of the normative stuff can usually get a little bit more out of less, whereas the person who's doing all of the stuff already, they actually typically have to do a lot. Yeah. Unfortunately, we have a friend back in Oz, and he is one of the guys that knows all the ins and outs of the research. He's one of the guys that takes all of the prophylactic supplementation. He stays lean, but he's a big human. And I know at one stage, man, he was having to basically do an ARB with a beta blocker and or a diuretic, depending on the approach that he was testing at the time, at a reasonable dosage and at least 5 by 20 minutes a week to keep his blood pressure and heart rate in check. But hereditary like congenital heart issues, problematic. So it was like, it is what it is. But the point is like you said, that he didn't start at 5 by 20, he started at 20 minutes and then 20 minutes and then 20 minutes. I'm of a similar opinion. Sub 80 is kind of like 80 is my limit. I will tolerate mid 70s, especially for very heavy individuals, provided that the other factors are still in play with regards to like general function of, moving, decent sleep quality and all that kind of stuff. If you can keep yourself in the sub 70s, I would say you're doing exceptionally well. Yeah. And the advantage here, if you got to think about it for somebody who's like, oh, why is that heart rate or that number or that threshold interesting to you or important to you? It's simply just because less beats will typically imply, if you've got a large body and a large human that requires, blood to be driven out to the peripheries when you're training, if you can get more out in less pumps, it usually means that the function of the heart is pretty good. So it's like an indirect indicator of heart efficiency with regards to that pumping quality, but it's not always the case.
No, not always, but usually a good indication. Yeah. Just to say, just because I say that 80 is like my limit, that's like just limit for general consideration. I will say, if I look through all of my data now on all of my clients, all of the big boys, they're all under 70. There's a large push. They're floating around like 63 to 65, most of them from memory. It's only very rare circumstances, like mate your boy, the example you use, where there's underlying things that are leaving these things elevated, like either hemochromatosis or something like that in the background.
Yeah. Or it's non-cardiorespiratory or cardiovascular problems, and rather, like you mentioned before, like sympathetic tone. This person is a massive stress head. They use a shit ton of stimulants. Maybe they got ADD and they use something like a dexamphetamine 3 times per day. You're probably not going to get that heart rate under, whatever it may be. So there are not everyone. Just because we say these things doesn't mean it applies to absolutely everyone. But for reasons for like obviously cardiovascular health, those specific requirements would be, again, building an aerobic base. Once we get through the aerobic base, the only time that I would shift into an anaerobic focus would be as if I've done all of these things and it doesn't seem to work. Then I want to like challenge the heart somewhat to try and get it to work a little harder to then improve things like stroke volume, like you said, the amount of blood you can get out per pump, then I would do that maybe once or twice a week within a controlled parameter. I'm not asking people to do like what I would typically do. So usually if I was just looking at an athlete, and you talked about zone 2 before, aerobic training may exist somewhere in that sort of like 55 to 65% of your perceived heart rate max. If you're interested in those numbers, this isn't perfect, but you can take the number 220 minus your age, multiply it by that percentage. And that's roughly that heart rate range that you would classify as being like not too stressful and primarily sort of working in that aerobic threshold. The anaerobic threshold for most individuals is going to be somewhere beyond 70 and up to about 80-ish if they're very fit. But if they're very fit, you wouldn't be having this conversation. So it's probably pretty low. Now, normally what you would do if you were talking about somebody who was a performance athlete, you would say, give me your maximum best effort for 10 to 30 seconds. And I'm then going to rest you for a period of time. Usually it's only about double that, maybe up to 4 times that time. And then you're going to go again multiple times. But if you're a bodybuilder who's done very little of this, it is absolutely not necessary for you to do maximum effort. You can just do sub-maximum effort, slightly harder than aerobic, and then a little bit less. And you can do longer rest periods. So it might be something like 5 sub-maximal efforts.
And we can label that MIT.
Exactly. Moderate intensity interval training. Although I always fuck it up and I write MITT on a lot of my guys' stuff. And then I look at it and I go, that's not correct.
No, absolutely.
Side note, one embarrassing one that I noticed I made a spelling mistake on not long ago. Not that I would ever prescribe this, George, but I wrote basal insulin instead of basal. Very good. The person didn't even pick up on it. Maybe they did, and they just thought they felt bad for me, didn't want me to feel like an idiot. So yeah, we're talking minimum 3 by 15 minutes per week, up to maybe 5 by 20 minutes per week. George mentioned the total numbers are probably a little bit easier, somewhere between 90 to 150 minutes, but start low, work your way up. Once you've built that, if you still see like a resting heart rate that's too high, and you've also challenged yourself in regards to removing sympathetic stimulants and all that kind of jazz, and sleep is okay. Sleep apnea is the biggest one, man. Fix that shit. You'll fix your heart rate and blood pressure real quick. Maybe you engage in some parasympathetic action like breathing or meditation or sauna work or something, and it's still a problem. Then test some anaerobic threshold stuff and see if it improves it.
Absolutely.
Caloric burn, pretty easy one to nail off, I think, mate.
Yeah, needs are a must. Look at the time across the day that you have to manipulate what energy is coming in to what energy is going out, balance the equation to meet the demand you're trying to facilitate. And sometimes for some people, whether via choice or because of routine and time restraints, it might make more sense to drop food or add in some more expenditure to create the level of deficit, or a mix of both. There's no real major preference. It's just a tool to use to create the deficit.
Yep. It's a physical calculator.
Mm-hmm.
An exercise calculator, that's it. And you know what, man, funnily enough, the numbers aren't too dissimilar. I think the most amount of cardio I've ever given, that's Joseph from Belgium. He's just going to be omitted for a second because he's had to do a lot. But the most I would typically have in a prep for somebody who's doing somewhere between 10 and 15,000 steps. So,
sorry, but to jump in, was he doing something silly like 250 cal per cardio session, something like that?
50 minutes in the morning and about 30 minutes in the afternoon.
I can't remember. You sent me through a calorie per cardio session requirement for him, and I remember going, "Whoa!"
It was 400, 200.
Nah, yeah, that was it. Yeah, I knew one of them was 50.
Yeah, but less steps. You see that? Actually, this is actually an interesting side shoot. Prior to that, we maybe had done like 250, 250, or 500 in one go, depending on what his preference was. But he was also doing like 12K steps, 13K steps. Okay. This time it was 8K steps, and then extra cardio, because it was more time efficient for him to do so, and he actually enjoyed it more. He's like, I'd rather just like let my steps be what they are. I'll maintain them, and I'll get in, crank out some cardio in the morning. I'll get in, crank out some cardio in the afternoon. But he was brought into bodybuilding doing this, so it's very normal for him. For me, there's no fucking way you'd get me doing that, dude. Not a chance. No, I've told this story plenty of times, man. I remember once in Sydney, it was raining, and I was like at like 5,000 steps. I need to get at 10,000. I was like, all right, that's 250K cardio. I'll go in and just knock that out in 25 minutes. I was on like 5 machines, man. I was bored after every 5 minutes. Bored on the treadmill, bored on the bike, bored on the cross train. I just kept rotating.
Yeah,
no way.
Yeah, just heart rate doing this very inconsistently.
Yeah, wouldn't recommend it. I will actually quickly say this as a side shoot. If you are somebody who's doing cardio with caloric burn, I don't know if anybody else does this, but my thought process behind this is, one, there's some enjoyment to it, just to minimize the boredom of cardio. But also earlier I was talking about the energy efficiency consideration, whereby when you do something, and this is the same with weight training, it's the same with everything, you do something repeatedly, you become more efficient at it, which means you burn less fuel. If you are using like, say, like a recliner bike versus a cross trainer and whatnot to do your calorie burn, I would suggest you choose, if possible, the same machine and do that for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Don't change it too much so that whatever metric you're using on that machine, it's consistent. If you have to escalate the calorie burn per week, you know that it's relative to the one you did prior. But I would also encourage you, like every, say, 2 to 4 weeks, to change that modality and shift it to something else and then shift back to decrease the likelihood of energy efficiency, so that similar to like in dieting processes where you, or phases, sorry, where you usually do less NEAT, you do less sort of like, unconscious movement. We can use steps to control for that. You can do this with your cardio as well. So that's my recommendation there.
I typically float between cross trainer to stationary bike, usually most of the time. Mine.
Yeah, I've given every one of my clients, I think, the option to do rowing erg, and not one of them has chosen it.
No fucking shit.
Not one.
I'm saying do the stepper, man. Oh.
But the point is this, right? I said to him, hey, look, man, this will be more efficient for energy burn, but it's going to suck, And like, would you rather sit on a bike for 35 minutes and just sort of pedal along, burn your calories, watch some YouTube? Or you can get on the row and maybe do it in 20 minutes, but at what cost? And that's the beauty of this. You get to choose.
I have another, for anyone who's wondering what to do for cardio, you're bored. Get into anime, start One Piece. You have 1,000, nearly like 1,200 episodes. Something crazy to catch up on. Cardio be a breeze, mate. That was my hat.
That's a lot of episodes.
You never be bored for cardio again.
So, George, Cartier or Cardi-no?
Oh, context. No.
Cardi-may. There you go. We've got it.
Cardi-may, yeah.
Fucking hell. That's
Cardi-may be.
We could have just said that right at the beginning. Anything else to add, George, before we wrap this up? Be less shit tip.
Oh, I was going to say, don't discredit on the importance of improving your lungs function, not just from the capacity of improving your qualities of, again, blood flow capacity, all these things we've just aforementioned, but also think of it from a performance standpoint as well. If the integrity of the musculature around the rib cage, around the diaphragm is stronger and thus more efficient in energy transfer when it comes to things like bracing through diaphragm, through core, all of these things will take a secondary indirect benefit from this as well. It's going to massively help with your pressing work, having a better functioning musculature around the diaphragm. It's going to immensely affect your pressing capacity, shoulder joint integrity. My be less shit tip, though, would probably lead on from that and say, don't discredit some of the lesser spoken about tools for parasympathetic regulation, breath work, mindfulness, meditation. Those last two do kind of come under the same thing, but do not negate those more spiritual hoo-ha methods of controlling your stress. It does make a huge impact.
Yeah, they are massive. And I would look at them as a secondary, not as a replacement thereof, because if you're out of breath, you probably should be challenging yourself a little bit more. Let's put it that way. Like if you can't catch your breath walking upstairs, then doing some of this work is going to be advantageous for you for many reasons. I'll say this because we're in like the 8 weeks out phase. Most people, when they get lighter, they move easier, and due to like time constraints, sometimes there'll be cardio or more steps put in prep. It's way easier to sustain it afterwards than it is to put it back in. So just look at trying to do some baseline work that just keeps you feeling healthy, and everything will flow on from that. There's a flow-on effect I've found with this stuff. So, George, before I get to the final 5 rapid questions, which I told you, is courtesy of Elizabeth, I just want to give a quick little update too from a business perspective from Flex Success. I am admittedly going to read some of this because I didn't want to get any of it wrong, but Flex has actually just recently launched a new coaching option now, I suppose, for us. So, over the years, we were general population plus athletic contest prep. We've really, really driven into the contest prep side of things. And with that comes with the unfortunate opportunity to also see, clients coming from other places, and even clients of ourselves, as much as we try, really struggling with the post-competition life. I've had some guys that have moved from being competitive amateur bodybuilders now into just like living their life as they normally would. And it's a difficult time to be in. I've been in it myself. There's plenty to have. So we actually now have like a very specific service that we're looking at to do life after competitions or life after competing. So if you're somebody who is looking to transition into that or has transitioned into it and is still struggling, then check us out. On our quick links in our bio, there's a link there to it. You'll see it's called LAC is the shorthand for it. But we've identified 7 key factors to this that we think most people struggle with. Their nutrition, shaking off unhelpful thoughts around their nutrition, trying to develop some new structure to their life, difficulty with their personal identity. I am a bodybuilder now. What do I do? Different, trying to find new ways to have like, a more positive mindset and having more motivation towards like life things as opposed to being all in on the bodybuilding mindset. Body image, huge one, George. You know, huge problem for people. And then even just like regulating your mood outside of having this one very specific goal that you had to now like shifting that focus. So if any of these sort of like, head point, like little talking points have sparked your ears, by all means, reach out to us, ask us some questions. But Life After Competing is our service we offer, which we're really excited to have. So
it's a real cool service to add on to the parameter or arsenal that we offer. It's probably the least spoken about thing in our industry. What happens next? What happens after? We talk about the whole during, like how to be the best at what we do in all feats or attempts, but we never talk much about the life after. What happens to the Olympia winner? What happens to the pro guy, a guy who got his pro card who didn't really do anything with it? What happens to the amateur who never really achieves these big things? All very different discussion and different mindsets that fall in, and also different approaches that would be needed off of each specific scenario, dependent on the problems that arise there. The loss of identity when you give so much to this thing, like bodybuilding really does take and saturate every aspect of our intent from, I've said before, like the minute we wake up in the morning, how we brush our teeth, the steps, the food we eat, the training, the exposure to environment, and not just what's around us, what we listen to, what we read. It literally consumes most of us to some varying degree at the top end. And that loss of all of that internal stuff that we attest to who we are, that disappearing, it's the most lost most people will ever feel in their life, just from the bodybuilding perspective. And if in the same way we have someone to coach us and monitor how we progress in bodybuilding, we should probably have that same support network with different skill set to help us navigate this just as important, if not more important, and also just as troublesome time frame.
Yeah. I know I personally, to quickly touch on this, I found it far easier to be a football player that existed in life. But when you're a bodybuilder or an active competitor in bodybuilding, like you said, it's an entire day thing. Like there's the consideration for when you wake up, when you eat. There's the consideration of when you're with friends, when do you eat. There's the consideration of how do I get this exercise in. There's the fact that there's just a heavy fucking focus on how you look. What is wrong with you? Not what needs improvement, but what is wrong, So yeah, I'm super excited. Chelsea's gonna, head up the front on this one for us as well, and like really take the bull by the horn, so to speak, on helping people transition and navigate this phase. So
another factor on that for Chelsea as well. It's not just a bodybuilder who's overtaking this. It's a bodybuilder who's also walked the walk and been through that same process. It's the person who's also had those same conversations, gone through the same emotional, mental, and physical change of everything that she's had to navigate, that she can also apply with practical application, as well as all of the research to back it.
Yeah, so super exciting.
Yeah, awesome.
On that nice note, we shift to this one. George.
Liz
rapid fire. I look at these quickly and I think, which one should I end on? I'm going to go in reverse order. George, awkwardly short pants or awkwardly tight pants?
Either's good for me.
That's tight pants. That's the sound of tight pants.
that sound awkwardly tight. I'm going tight. I used to wear skinny jeans anyway.
A car with a horn that sounds like a sexual male moan or a fart?
What's a sexual male moan?
I'm not going to do it, George.
I want to hear your impression. I'm taking the sexual moan just for the meme quality that could come from this.
Imagine farting at people every time they did something that. All right.
Oh,
$1 million or 1,000,000 years?
I'm gonna sound vain when I say this. I'm taking the $1 million. I have no interest in living for the indefinite future. I don't think the world's that wonderful, and I don't want to see that much of it. But during the time I have, I would like to be able to maximize all my experiences, and thus there is a financial trade there. So that, and also I could leave most of it to charities after I'm gone.
Yeah, dude, I would take $1 million over 125 years, I reckon.
Absolutely.
Because to be perfectly honest, I'd be happy with 85. I say that now, obviously, as a 38-year-old, but fuck, whatever. One eye or 7 fingers?
7 fingers. The potential is endless.
So much grabbing. Also, where would the one eye be?
Oh yeah, imagine if it was right in the center.
Does it mean you've lost an eye, or do you only start with one eye? Anyway, rapid fire, right?
You're peripheral vision, man.
The eyes at the back of your head. Attractive lady boy or 90-year-old woman?
Oh, that's a good one, Liz. That's a good one. Oh, I mean, I'm not, just for the conversation, I'm going with the old lady for the simple fact that I couldn't do it. But if no one knew and you was like, which one's the better option? Every man knows what they're realistically going to be more attracted to.
Who says that there's not a hot 90-year-old, feel like there might be an attractive 90-year-old something. You know, like what's I don't know, Angelina Jolie gonna look at when she's 90? I don't know.
Probably the same.
Yeah, she's probably going to use some form of like genetic modification. Yeah, that's a genetically modified 90-year-old female. There you go, done.
Yeah, solid, sold.
Who's done a cardio, so she's still fit. George, mate, pleasure as always. Thank you for coming on. To those listening, you know the drill. If you like what you heard today, give us a 5-star review, share, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Until next time.
Peace.